It's too early in the day to drink wine here.
Soraya. Welcome to the Second Line Show. I'm Nola Nash. Let's let the good times roll. Hi, welcome once again to the Second Line Show. I am your host, Nola Nash. We have got a historic show today. We're going to be talking about some historical fiction, some historical research, some historical nonfiction, and all sorts of fun things with some amazing ladies today from all over the place. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. So you guys who are watching, whether you're watching now or watching later, go ahead and put your comments in the comment sections from wherever you're watching live today, whether you're watching in Nola's Second Line, the Right Review, or on YouTube. Please, please, please get those comments in. If you haven't given StreamYard permission to use your name, please put your name in the comments as well, because we do like to actually acknowledge who's here and see who's joining us today. So we'll get to as many of those comments as we can. And if we can't get to yours, no worries. We will be going back through those comments and hoping to get to answer all of the questions that you post for us. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the folks we've got joining us today. We have Miss Annette, Miss Joy Jordan Lake joining me from 10 minutes up the road, we just realized, which was pretty awesome. Soraya Lane joining us from the other side of the world. We're talking hemispheres here from New Zealand. And we've got Miss Sandell, who's up there with Annette, right? You guys are pretty close together.
Close, yeah.
Right. And Miss Jane Healey. Jane, where did you say that you were from?
Just outside Boston, where it's just starting to snow. Yeah.
Awesome. I was afraid I was going to get that wrong, so I was going to let you say it. It's Boston, but if I say that, I'm going to be wrong, and then that's not going to be good. So, ladies, we are going to go Brady Bunch style. So I'm going to start with Annette over here. And so you get to introduce yourself first. That's always like, we're all playing the Brady Bunch games where we're going. You get to introduce yourself first. Tell us a little bit about what you write, what you like to write. And let's see, we always come up with a goofy question for everybody. So let's see. We've done what's your favorite color, what's your favorite Christmas song. Shoot, I should have thought about this. What's your favorite wine? We're all cheers, ladies. Except for Soraya, this is entirely too early.
I've got the palate
somewhere, Soraya.
And so I am the least sophisticated person in the world. I like really sweet wines, and I like hard apple cider, and that's about all I can handle. And I like champagne, and I can go a little like wacky with the champagne, but other than that, I'm like an apple cider sort of girl. Really boring.
I'm a sweet wine person. This is Moscato, so it's practically dessert in a glass. So
Exactly.
It's a little fizzy. It's, this is truly not the wine aficionado's wine here at all. So Annette, tell us a little bit about your work, what you do, who you are.
I was born in Germany, and so my first novel, The Vanishing Sky, is set in Germany, which is not something I ever planned. If someone had told me even 20 or 30 years ago when I was a kid, you were going to write a book about Germany, I would have said, no way, because when we came to the US, I immediately switched to English, and that was just, the way it was. But strangely, the stories came out in the novel. I also write short fiction, and my short fiction tends to have more of a slightly supernatural quality to it, some of it. And so it's sort of a mix. I'm working on a piece right now, another novel that's based on one of the short stories that has a historical component and also has a supernatural component, about a little boy who, when he starts talking at the age of 3 for the first time, speaks only ancient Greek. So it sort of combines my love of history and my love of the creepy. Yeah.
That sounds right up my alley. Absolutely right up my alley. As we get to go over to Joy here in just a second, Patricia Sands is telling us hello. So Patricia, who's got quite a blanket of snow going up there where she is, I believe. Hello, Patricia. Thank you for joining us. Tim Kelly is here as well. Hi, Tim. Yeah, you definitely need to get to know these ladies. They're amazing. Sarah Went is here as well. Hey, Sarah, and Miss Sharon Person is here. So from Minnesota, oh gosh, I can only imagine how cold you are up there, Sharon. So cold. I don't like the cold. I'm a Louisiana girl. Tennessee cold is about as much as I can stand. It's the worst. Even that is like, it's rough on me, man. It really is. Joy, my neighbor Joy. My new neighbor.
We just kind of met today, and we live, 10 minutes, we decided? Like a long bus ride.
Yep. It's amazing.
Okay, so do I start with the wine question? Is that?
Sure. Start with the wine question.
Okay, first I have true confessions. My favorite wine is probably, I'm a white wine chick, totally. And so this is, I should admit right off the bat, true confessions, this is actually Diet Coke. I am all out. Isn't that awful? I mean, how do you run out of it in the pandemic? I think that's how bad things are.
They deliver that here, Joy. They deliver one.
Exactly. Please, someone help me. Exactly. It got so bad last night. My husband and I shared a margarita from a can. So that's where we are in this pandemic world. So
I'm gonna bike ride you over some White Claw. I've got a drawer.
You would. I think investing forever, Nola. Yeah. I've actually lived all over. I used to. I was born in Washington, D.C., but grew up in the mountains of East Tennessee, and I've lived all over the South. And then I lived in New England for quite a number of years. So I lived up near where you guys in New Hampshire and Boston are. Loved New England. Absolutely loved it. Lived in Texas for a while. So anyway, let's see, what do I write? Historical fiction. Lately, the past 3 novels have been historical mysteries. And one was set in the mountains of North Carolina, kind of a coming of age story, Blue Hole Back Home. And then one in Charleston, South Carolina, that was a dual timeline, which my hat is off to anyone who writes dual timelines. I love to read them. They are bears to write. So that was set in 1822 and 2015, back and forth in Charleston, called A Tangled Mercy. And this one that came out this month, just a few days ago, where is it set? It's set at the Biltmore Estate. It's been a long 2 weeks. It's set at the Biltmore Estate in North Carolina, and it's set in 1895, and historical mystery with lots of suspense. And the one I'm working on now is set on the coast of Maine. So just fair warning, I may be visiting all of you who are in New England. I need an excuse to visit Soraya, and I've always wanted to go to New Zealand. So if I
me
get
too.
a good spot, I'd be there. So.
Me
Come on
too. We're all gonna go join Soraya over there. When we first went into lockdown and all of our quarantine and everything, my mom and I were sitting on my balcony having a glass of wine. This is what we do. And she just looked at me and said, "Do you think they'd have us in New Zealand?" And I said, "If you're going to New Zealand, I'll go to New Zealand." I mean, it's better than other places you could have suggested. It's like, I mean, you're going to suggest a place, New Zealand is a good choice. Let's go there. Needless to say, we're still in Tennessee, and that was just that. Probably halfway through a bottle of wine talking, I'm not sure, but it was like, that's a good idea. Let's go there. So speaking of going to New Zealand, Soraya, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Soraya, and as you say, I'm from New Zealand, and I have to tell you, it's actually made news headlines here how many Americans have been going onto our immigration website and inquiring how they move here. So it's been our headline news about all these Americans. Yeah.
Well, good to know I made the news, because I totally did that.
So I missed the memo. I missed the memo on the wine somehow. But anyway, it's only 2:00 in the afternoon here, so it does feel a wee bit early. But I have to do a shout out to New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. We Kiwis think it's the best in the world, so you might have to try it. But no, that's normally what you'll find me drinking. But yeah, so I write, like some of the other ladies here, I write historical fiction, so historical women's fiction. And I've mainly set, so I've had 6 historical novels out, and they've all been set around World War II. And I think with every book, I become more and more passionate about telling the stories of women from the past, and really just trying to share what they've done and how amazing they were. And although my novels are fiction, they are based on fact and what some pretty amazing women have done out there or in the past, in the 40s in particular.
I love it. And I love World War II. I mean, it's not something I write, but it was always something that I loved reading, World War II history. And I think it comes down to both of my grandfathers telling me great stories about World War II, and just, just so much about the people at the home front, the people who were away. And there was just so much just romance around a lot of it, but then there was also so much horror, and it's just kind of that clash of the two things together made for some really dynamic stories. And so that was always been a very interesting time period. And Sandell, you also write a little bit about World War II time period as well. But Sandell, most important question of the evening: what wine do you like?
Well, I'm drinking a California blend, kind of like full-bodied and nice color, and I think that's always my go-to winter wine. But I'll switch to nice rosés or white in the summer, and I'll never pass up a glass of champagne. So
my kind of lady right there.
Yeah. And I'm writing this book that I have just published. My debut memoir at 81 is memoir, but I started out as a fiction writer, and with most things I do, they're unplanned, and I kind of go and get in through the trap door that opens up for me somehow. I no intention of being a writer. I was a teacher, and I was went back to school for a Master of Arts in Liberal Studies in mid-age, really. And I walked into a classroom thinking I was taking a literature class from a visiting professor who had taught this wonderful course the summer before that I did not sign up for. So I thought, oh, I'll catch it this summer. And I walked into this room, and there was a round table, and there were chairs, and I was the first one. And I looked up at this man, happened to be Ishmael Reed, who is a novelist and a satirist. And he's most famous for, I guess, his novel Mumbo Jumbo. Oh. And I looked at him and I said, "Is this literature?" And he said, "No, it's fiction." I said, "Oh, I don't write fiction." And he said, "How do you know?" Oh. And I said, "Well, I guess I don't." And he said, "Sit down." And by the end of the class, I had basically a novella. And he sent me to his agent, and I thought I was on my way. And I was in my very early 40s at that point. Along the way, I published in a lot of literaries. I switched to nonfiction. And in 2011, I was awarded a residency in France, and I had just finished what I called my failed memoir, and I was setting out to write essays, and lo and behold, I came up with a memoir. So that's my story.
That's amazing. And I got to tell you, 81 looks really good on you. Yeah. I'm hoping it looks as good on me. That's amazing. Oh my gosh. We're going to have to talk beauty secrets later, because I'm impressed, lady. That is definitely, you are So fascinating, so beautiful, so talented and humble. Thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to hear how your trip to France actually impacted your writing. So I know Patricia Sands is going to hold on to that little nugget right there because she loves France as well. So you and Patricia Sands need to talk about France for a while. She would be happy to talk France with you, I'm quite sure. I love it when she tells her stories about going to France. She's going to join us. Speaking of France, Patricia Sands is going to join us. I think it's December 30th. I'm not looking at my calendar. Patricia, correct me if I'm wrong. But I think we're doing a New Year's Eve show with Patricia. And we've also got some special guests who will be joining us from Paris. So we're going to have kind of a little French fanfare going into the new year here at the end of the year. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Miss Jane Healey, tell us about yourself, lady, and what you're drinking, and what are your cats' names in case they make an appearance and we give them a shout out.
Yeah, I'm going to apologize in advance if the cats show up. Their names are Boots and Chip, and they're brothers, but Boots is 20 pounds and Chip is 8. So
oh gosh.
One of them got the fat bean. So I'm super boring. I drink both Kendall Jackson Chardonnay because I like red wine, but 2 sips and I look like a vampire. It like stains my teeth. So so I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's lovely to meet all those of you I haven't met. Totally agree about Patricia Sands. I'll have to come on the 30th because she's a wonderful writer in person. Oh, she says she is coming on the 30th.
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. So I write. I like to say I write about lesser known story of women in history. My first novel came out in 2017. It was called The Saturday Evening Girls Club, and it was about a group of women in Boston's North End. They were Italian and Jewish immigrant women and kind of ahead of their time at the turn of the 20th century. After that one came out, I pivoted to World War II, and my second novel came out in 2019. And Patricia says, I love Jane's cats. Thank you.
Cats are fans.
My second novel is The Beantown Girls. It came out 2019, and it was about a group of women in the Red Cross called the Clubmobile Girls, and they served coffee and donuts at the front line. Oh, there he is, Boots.
Hi, Boots.
Like, oh, that's cute.
That was pretty good.
That was good. I didn't even give them extra food for that. So, so the Beantown Girls, World War II, latter half of the war, a group of Red Cross women who served coffee and donuts on the front lines of the war. But when I dug into their stories from a research perspective, they did so much more than that. So that came out, and then my next one comes out April 1st, and it's called The Secret Stealers. And I wasn't essentially planning to write a World War II novel, but I discovered these stories of the women of the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which was the precursor to the CIA in World War II, and essentially some of America's first female spies. And really fascinating stories. This one is a little more of a mystery thriller than my first 2 novels, but it was really challenging and fun to write. And I actually, Patricia and I share a love of France with Patricia Sands, and one of the best parts of the research was taking a trip to Paris with my husband, which was incredible. So that's my story.
That is awesome. I have not made it to France other than to Chamonix, which, I had gone to Switzerland, actually, just went through the Alps and kind of like, oh, look, there's Chamonix. We spent a day there. Yeah. But my mom had the best Christmas ever. And she was given, her boss wanted at an auction, a cruise up the Seine, and couldn't go. But it had to be used by the end of the year. And so he gave it to my mom and her friend. The 2 of them went, and they had this Christmas cruise along the Seine. And so they would stop and, do different things. And her stories were unbelievable. She actually got to go to Christmas Mass at Notre Dame before, of course, So I have my fleur-de-lis ornament that hangs with my Christmas stuff from Notre Dame. And so now it's even more special that she got to do that, and I have that little ornament from the gift shop at Notre Dame. Okay. So she has the greatest stories about some of their adventures just that week on that little cruise and some of the cool things that they got to do. And it's like, man, one day I'll get to France. I've been to some places, but other than that one day in a ski town, really touristy ski town, it didn't really get to see much of the country, but I hear that it's beautiful all over. And the funny thing is one of the books that is actually my next book that's due to come out has the main character goes all over the place, and she's gone to different places. And one of the places she spends a lot of time in is France, particularly Paris. And so that is one of those places that I've researched a lot. I have kind of that connection to France simply because of the South Louisiana thing and all the French influence that we have there. And so I always loved that history and that culture. And so it was fun for me to write about that, but it was also kind of tugging at me. It's like, I want to go. So maybe when the pandemic is over, get a big group together. First, we'll go see Soraya down in New Zealand because then we'll go to France. Let's get like this author's trip, like going around.
Exactly.
We're going to have our convention all over the place. So, ladies, with all of the research that you have to do and different things now, Sandell, yours started as a memoir, and you actually were interviewing people that were part of the history. I mean, they lived the history. And so you were getting the stories directly from them. And that is truly special. That is a gift right there, to be able to get it straight from these people. What was that experience like? And is that something that they were willing to share at first, or are they anxious to tell that story, or is that something that kind of has to be warmed up to?
Oh, it has to be warmed up to. It was totally amazing. And thank you so much, Nola, for having me here. I just find it such fun. So I, through a series of introductions, have a really dear friend who is a rabbi in the States. And I went to talk to him about my trip because I began to be interested in Jews and Jewish history during World War II under the Vichy government. And he said to me, well, if you're interested in that, I have someone you need to meet. And this person lived in Paris. She was a Jewish historian and a journalist. And she and I began exchanging emails. And then I was on a totally different track, and I met her one day in Paris, and for the first time, and she said to me, well, I know you're disappointed in an interview that didn't happen. She said, but I have someone for you to meet. And she said, tomorrow we will go and see Germaine Poliakov. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I don't know this woman. I don't even know if I want to interview this woman. I'm interested in this little village that I've been staying in and their history. What do I want with this Parisian woman? Well, this Parisian woman was 92 when we met, and she was a caretaker in a secret house in a village in the south of France called Beaulieu-sur-Dordogne. And Valerie and I arrived in her flat, and Valerie became my translator. And when we arrived, she had her dining table spread with photographs from the Second World War of the secret house, of the girls. And then I left that encounter, and I did what a journalist friend told me to do. I went to have a glass of wine, and I wrote down my impressions of everything. I had recorded and taken notes. So I had what she said, but what I didn't have was my own feelings and the atmosphere and all of that. And I just sat and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And I went back to France every year for about 7 or 8 years. And one year I went back twice. And every year I saw Germaine, and we became such good friends. And she passed away this past February at 101.
Wow.
Yeah.
How amazing.
I know.
That is incredible.
You know, Nola, what's so amazing to me is that at this moment in my life has opened up. And people might think, oh, it's so late, blah, blah, blah. But just imagine the absolute wonder of having your life open up at this age. It's very exciting.
Well, and think what a gift she was to you at 91. And what a gift, just your stories and what you can tell based on her research. You know, it's a very cyclical gift that you have, that you can continue to give, the gift that she gave to you of her story and her information. And now you're sharing that same information even wider than she ever could. I mean, she had basically her own Anne Frank story happening. I mean, as so many people did at that time. And what an amazing thing so late in her life to have been able to be so integral to something that someone else was doing that could then share this information and share her story. And I love that you said that it was the impressions, it was how it made you feel that was important for you to capture, because that can be such an overwhelming feeling in the moment when you're told a story like that. And then at the same time, it can be difficult to recapture later. And so I love that you took the time to really go in and write about how that made you feel, to hear those things, how that story impacted you on an emotional level, not just the historian, journalistic, intellectual level. That is good writing right there. That's where it comes from. And I love that all of your stories are a different perspective of a similar time period. So you had her story, and Annette, your book has to do with the other side of the coin. So yours is from the German perspective, and a German family that is kind of torn in different avenues of loyalty to different things. And how did that, I mean, as a German-born woman, I can see that would be a really important perspective for you to capture as well. How did you approach what you did to research that and to get that story told the way you wanted it to be told?
Well, you know, so much of the story was really inspired by my own family history. And it's a history I did not know very much about because both of my parents never really spoke to me about their childhoods in Germany. And my dad died when I was 16 before I ever really had the chance to ask him anything. And before I was really even aware enough to think that I should ask him before he was gone. And so I started writing in earnest when I came across a photograph of him in his Hitler Youth uniform. And I hadn't known he'd been in the Hitler Youth. And when I saw the photograph, even though I shouldn't have been surprised given his age, because he was born in 1930, which would have been just the age for mandatory service, I was still really stunned by it. And so I went to my mother, since he was long gone and anyone who sort of would know anything about it was long gone firsthand. And my mom started telling me what he had told her over the years of their marriage, how his father was very demanding and had really high expectations of both him and of his older brother, and how my father, unlike his older brother, had a really hard time living up to those expectations and actually ran away from his post. And once I'd exhausted my own family history, I found some journals that my great-grandfather had written from between the wars. I found my father's school notebook and this is sort of terrifying, but the racial purity notebook that he had to fill out, showing his ancestry all the way back to 1819. You know, once I found these things, and they all really sort of weighed on me pretty heavily, I had to go to sort of secondary research in both German language books and English books, sort of firsthand accounts of people inside Germany who lived through those years. And really, though, the photograph of my father in his uniform and the sadness I saw on his face was what stayed with me. And I kept that picture on my desk. There were always a few objects, because I think writers are sort of vampires sometimes, you know, and you take little objects, and those are sort of, they almost have like a talismanic power as you write. And so I had that photograph. I had a Walking Lady Liberty coin, because the younger boy in the family that was inspired by my father did magic, and he used American coins, which was a very, it was a very risky thing to do in Germany at the time. But you know, those coins were really magic to him. And so I had one of those coins, and I just had these few objects. And then I just went into that world. And I know all the ladies will know what I'm talking about. I just went into that world and just stayed with those characters and sort of looked at the world through their eyes. And that was really how I wrote it.
Wow.
And what a perspective that you have, and what, again, a gift that you had in finding all of those primary sources, and that it's always so impactful, so powerful to be able to take those things that were written with someone's hand, their thoughts, their soul written on paper.
Yeah.
And to give them life again, and to just, breathe that story back into existence, and to understand that there are different perspectives to this same story. It's one of the reasons I love that in so many 10th grade high school classes, English classes, they read The Book Thief. And I taught 10th grade English, and I had them read The Book Thief as well, because it is such a dynamic story and a heart-tugging story. I mean, it will break you reading that book, but to understand that not everybody was a willing participant on any side. And to understand that sometimes people have to do things they don't necessarily want to do to preserve life, to, try to find the greater good, to help the greater good, and, just to even insulate their own families. And families don't always agree. And so, it's a great experience for people to be able to see all of the facets that there are to one event, one historical event. And so much of what all of you have written, each adds a facet to that stone, because you're coming at it from a different side, a different perspective, a different angle. And it takes that event when you've read all of those and makes it so much more powerful and so much more important to learn about than you ever could have imagined from any history book. And Soraya, your perspective coming from New Zealand and choosing that time period, when we tend to think about that as more of, it's the United States, it's Europe, it's Japan later, we have Russia. We don't really think about World War II south of the equator, but yet that's the time period where you've chosen to write about as well. Why that time period? What appealed to you? I mean, we're coming from this Northern Hemisphere perspective here. So bring us down to the Southern Hemisphere and explain what that time period means to you.
Sure. And I think, most of my characters are usually American or British. And I think that as New Zealanders, we do feel that really strong connection, Australians and New Zealanders actually, to those allies and to those sort of bigger countries that our young men, were aligned with when they were serving. And I've had both my grandfathers were serving in World War II. And so it's always just been something, I think I've been brought up with all those stories about what they went through and, what it was like for them. And I know one of my grandfathers in particular never ever spoke about that period. And then I guess just, being a young woman at the time when I first started writing these novels, first started researching this sort of time period. I was in my late 20s, around maybe 30. And I just became really interested in, I'm hearing all these stories from the male perspective, but I just felt that there was such a lack of information about what women went through during that period, which has, really got me on the track of writing these books. And the more I looked into it, the more I thought at that time that we just really didn't have that perspective of what it was like for women. And I know now in the last few years that has really changed, and there's been so many wonderful books published and more film and TV series that are really focusing on that female perspective. But I think there were so many New Zealand women who were working overseas as nurses as well, who were away for a very, very long time. It was, it must have seemed incredible to them traveling from New Zealand all the way to, England and France and other countries in Europe to assist with the war effort.
I can't even imagine how far away that must have felt for them, and just isolated.
I think
and
I've
yet
frozen.
There you go. You're wiggling a little bit. It's hard when you're a world away, a hemisphere away. But I like that you focused in on the women's perspective as well. There you go. You're back. You're kind of in and out there, but yeah. There you go. So the women's perspective is a very interesting thing. I mean, when you watch
I'm back.
old movies,
I'm not sure what's going on.
That's okay. When you look at the women's perspective, if you're watching the old movies and things, it tends to be about the soldiers. The soldiers were going off to war. There's not as much about the women and their involvement. And, at the time when all of this was going on and the movies were being made and, Silver Screen was all about, the war, it was it was the men's stories and then the women who loved them, who were home. But there were women working. There were women who were giving up everything and going into this. And we really didn't get a lot of that historically. And so it's an amazing perspective and, life to bring back to these women, to be able to give them, their due for the work that they did. And Joy, you attacked it the same way. I mean, it was, here's this small group of women that are not so well known, but their story does need to be told. So as you were focusing in on them, what were some of the things that you experienced, that you learned from their story?
As far as the small group of women, I bet you're thinking of Jane's Beantown Girls.
Oh, yeah, the Beantown Girls.
But
sorry,
I was thinking,
why did I have? I don't know.
No worries. There is a cool. Even though my latest book was 1895, there's a very cool World War II tie-in. But Jane, go ahead and talk about your Beantown Girls.
Well, and then we'll get to the correspondent. I've got to say, it's the wine. It goes sideways.
It's the J names too, right? Joy.
Right.
I know.
Yeah.
Completely interchangeable. Yeah.
I'm just going to move you around. I'll move you around to the Brady Bunch square. We'll do this later. We'll edit it all in post. No, there's no post. Jane, Beantown Girls. Then we're going to talk about the correspondent.
Okay. So Beantown Girls, it was really interesting. I was kind of searching for my next story, and my grandfather was a firefighter on the Navy ships in World War II. So I was always fascinated with World War II. But like many of the veterans of that war, he came back and put it in a box and never spoke of it again. That was it, So I really wanted to write for Beantown Girl. I wanted to write a big sweeping story about the war, but I wanted it to be from a female's perspective. And so I actually came across a picture on Pinterest, believe it or not, and it was these four women standing in a field in the middle of England, and it said, Red Cross Clubmobile Girls, Leicester, England, 1944. And I was like, what's a clubmobile? Like, that's not a real word. That's a made-up word. And what's a clubmobile girl? And so I started digging, and I found that it was, it's what it sounds like. It's a Red Cross club on wheels. And it was staffed by three young American women. They had to be over 25, not married, college educated. They only chose 1 out of 6 applicants, and they served coffee, donuts, and smiles. Literally, that's what it says in the promo material, to men at the front lines of the war. And so I was totally intrigued, and I started doing the research. And I'm really fortunate. I'm about 7 miles from Harvard University, and there's this library there. It's a research library. It's called the Schlesinger Library, and it's this amazing research library for American women's history. And I had worked with them on the Saturday Evening Girls Club, so I reached out to them with really low expectations for what they might have. I'm like, do you have anything on this program, these women? And they're like, as a matter of fact, we have 13 boxes of letters and diaries, and they had a uniform, and they even had like little scribbled notes about like how to make the donuts the best way. It was like hitting the lottery as a researcher. And what I found, because I think letter writing is very much a lost art, and the women in Europe were incredible writers, and they knew, it was very clear from their letters and diaries that they were witnessing history and had such amazing stories to tell. So the women in Europe, like towards the end of the war, 1944 to 45, really gave me my story. And so it starts in the UK and then moves over to the continent of Europe in 44. Yeah.
That is amazing. I love that you guys have all kind of fallen into some really tremendous research opportunities and just gold mines of information. And the impact that has on the writing itself is tremendous. It is absolutely vital.
Yeah.
And Joy, now that I've got your book straight.
No worries.
This show goes sideways, and I'm usually the pause.
I'm impressed you can just keep it, you know, keep it all. Anybody who teaches middle school, man, you know.
Right.
This is exam week. Grades are due. I don't know where my brain is.
Right.
We're all lucky I'm upright right now. Somewhere under a table. So Joy, tell us about your research.
Well, the interesting connection, I just fell in love years ago. That's a whole different story. I won't tell this time, but fell in love with the mountains of North Carolina. That's a lifelong love. But then the Biltmore Estate itself, I was intrigued and just have thought for years that would be fun to set a historical mystery there. And so I was kind of digging for, you know, sort of what's going on in the 1890s when this gorgeous, you know, 250 room, essentially castle is being built, largest, you know, private residence in the United States, and just this, you know, gorgeous French Renaissance chateau is being built. What's going on? What are people thinking about, fighting about in the 1890s? And one thing I ran across that ties in with all of you World War II wonder people was one of the characters who's actually based on an actual person is named Madison Grant. And he ran in the same social circles as the guy who built the Biltmore Estate, George Vanderbilt, part of the Vanderbilt clan, the robber barons, and whatever. He was the youngest of 8 children, George was, and built this gorgeous. George was not part of the family business. He just inherited enough money to be able to collect art and build this gorgeous place. But he was just a sweet, gentle soul who just, you know, walked through the woods, rode horses, read books, and collected art. So I think we all would have been best friends with this man, who, you know, enjoyed sharing a glass of wine with him. But he ran in the same social circles as this Madison Grant. They were about the same age. And as I began reading, eugenics were a big deal in the time, you know, kind of was wildly popular at the time, even in all our Ivy League institutions. This was, you know, had really sort of taken the field. And some of our leading intellectuals were kind of enamored of this whole idea of, you know, racial superiority. And they were putting this kind of pseudoscience behind it. You know, we probably all studied that when we were younger, but I was just, it was chilling to go back and read this stuff from people who really believed it at the time. And Madison Grant was someone who he became enamored with eugenics at the time. He was the one who essentially gave us Glacier National Park. He was big into conserving land out west. He gave us the Bronx Zoo. He saved the American buffalo. He was big into conservation. So he did some good things, but that began to, in his mind, began to turn to conserving, in his mind, the white race. He was afraid the white race was going to fade. And he becomes increasingly obsessed from the 1890s forward, so that by the time, and here's where World War II ties in, by the time he got to the 1920s, he published a book called The Passing of the Great Race. And it's this, you know, pseudoscientific text that he does maps and graphs and charts and shows where, you know, it's important to save the white race. And it's absolutely horrifying. Well, Adolf Hitler read the book, loved the book in the 1920s, wrote him a fan letter, and apparently drew some of Hitler's ideas in the Third Reich, drew from Grant, but not just Grant. I think this, as an American, it was very chilling to me that, you know, it's easy to think from Hollywood lets us kind of believe, oh, those evil Germans, how could they have fallen, you know, to realize how many American intellectuals were involved in this movement that led to the Holocaust. And it was, you know, it was a good wake-up call to, like, it was just chilling. Anyway, so Madison Grant is a character in the novel, comes down and stays at the Biltmore. So anyway, that's a fun World War II tie-in with all of you guys.
Yeah, and I guess if you think about it, I mean, that was being written, and you know, that time period, you know, we were still, you know, well behind the civil rights movement, and you know, all of these things had not happened, and so as a country, we were very divided when it came to that, and so it's easy to see that, you know, something like that could have surfaced and could have taken some root. and made its way into hands that obviously had the means to do something about it, where Madison Grant didn't necessarily have anything more than the idea. So, I mean, that's an interesting, it's kind of taking World War II and some of those ideas back in time a little bit to kind of see where they gained some traction and why it was able to gain some traction. I got to spend last Christmas at Biltmore just touring the home, and my God, what a place dressed for Christmas. Holy cow. Oh my gosh. And if you ever go to Biltmore, anytime you get to go to Biltmore, it is worth seeing. But if you get to go at Christmas, it is staggering. That place is absolutely staggering. The Christmas trees, the decorations, just wow. I mean, it's overwhelming. It's kind of like when you see the Grand Canyon. It's like you have trouble taking it in that this is a real place, and this was actually the home for like 2 people and their kid. You know, I mean,
right.
I mean, it's like, huh? I mean, that's like so many rooms, and you go on this tour and you think that you're close to done, and you're nowhere near done. I mean, you've got to be walking miles to this place just to go see the rooms and all of that. It's an incredible place. And of course, I went at night, so it was all lit up and everything. So we didn't get to see the grounds. We didn't get to see just the vista out of the back windows and everything. But it was worth it to see it lit up at Christmas, you know, in the nighttime. And it's absolutely staggering to go see this place. So yes, it is America's castle, and you've got to go see it if you ever get the chance. Not only that, but where it is located is some of the most beautiful country, and it is just breathtaking in that part of the United States. So, I mean, they weren't messing around when they chose that location. They knew exactly what picture they were framing in their windows. It is beautiful. It's just beautiful. And the construction of the house is an interesting history as well, as they kind of tell you how it was built, and you know how are they actually supporting this massive home and everything that ran that house. It's just amazing. It really is. So you guys all have very different perspectives, different. Sorry, is your book you wanting to get into?
I have someone here trying to get in.
Hello. What is your puppy's name?
Oh, this is Ted, and he likes to be part of everything. No kisses. Please, no kisses. Yeah, there he is.
Hi, Ted.
Where's he gone?
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. He's been at the vet this morning, so he's a bit needy.
Oh, bless his heart. Well, Ted, you can join the show anytime you want, honey. Just say hello to Jane's cats. That's food's I'll say hello. Dudley's in his crate. I could get him out too. We all have fun. So we've got some questions. Hopefully you guys can check on these. And we've got, how do you all spend your, how much time do you spend doing research? I think as somebody who does research, it can be time sucking, because you end up going down rabbit trails. I mean, for me anyway, as I'm researching, all of my research, like I said, I've got the one novel that goes to different parts of the world, but anything that I write, even if it's got, a modern setting, has got history in it. I was a history and English double major in college, so historical fiction is totally my jam. But I also grew up in South Louisiana, and so paranormal is also my jam. So I tend to write with those 2 things in mind. But for me, I have, in order to keep it straight, and I'm a goofball person. I mean, I'm such a digital person. I teach online, the most digital person in the world. But what I do, I make scrapbooks, y'all. This is how I keep everything straight. So each book, it's like, here's the stuff. Here's like, I label things. I've got, this is how I write my notes, so I can move them around. So I have all of my stuff. This is actually for the book I'm working on now. This is for Nightingale on the Square. And it is about when Jenny Lind, the opera singer, came to New Orleans and spent some time in New Orleans. And so it's historical fiction. There's no paranormal in that particular series. It is just historical fiction. But, there's so many different things to research depending on where it's going. So Jenny Lind's story is in there. They're resurrecting a sugarcane plantation that has just been ravaged by a levee break. And so I had to figure out, I had to learn all about sugarcane and how to grow it and what was the mill like, and all of these things. So in order to keep it all straight, I've got all of these things in my journals, and then all of these little books that I carry around. And so I'm this scrapbooking author because I'm tangible at the same time that I love my digital stuff and I'm good at technology. I do like to have my notes in my hands. I do like to highlight things and write my little scribbly notes and make it pretty and then screw it all up because I've scribbled some other note on top of it. And I like having it tangibly in my hand. But the other thing that I do as well is, like some of you have had the opportunity to do, is to travel for your work. But my travel always takes me to New Orleans. Now, in Traveler, the book that we go to Paris, and there were some places in that book that she goes that I have been, but there are a few that she needed to go to. I have not made it to yet, so there was a lot of research there as well. But I did kind of pull from some of my own experience in some places. But New Orleans is one of those places that has so much history, that has so much layered between truth and fiction that it's very difficult to tell where one is, and which is truth and which is fiction. And then the legends have taken on a life of their own. And so many people in New Orleans just take those legends as historical truth. And so, because that's how they see it, for me, if that's how they see their history, then that is how their history needs to be preserved, and if they see it as fact, and that's kind of the wide majority, I could debunk it all I wanted to with research, but am I really doing their culture justice if I do that? No. So we're going to work all of that in. And so I get to spend a lot of time talking to people in New Orleans. And one of my very best friends is a medium and a ghost tour guide in New Orleans. And so
that's amazing.
She is a wealth of information. She knows so much about that history. And so anything that I need to do magically related, she has some training in voodoo, Reiki, Wiccan, all of this stuff that she has training in that she can do. She's a tarot reader in the French Quarter. I mean, she's just so much fun. I love her. And she's on some ghost tours to do some research. She's a paranormal investigator. It's like, come with me and let me research with you because I know what you know. And so we do. And so she will bring her paranormal equipment and we'll go different places that are supposed to be haunted. And we learn the history about the places. And so much of what I get to work into my stories with that, the history and the magic of New Orleans comes from her. I had another friend of mine who's down there. She is a voodoo priestess. And so she and I met and we sat in a courtyard bar off of Bourbon Street, having hurricanes in the courtyard and just talking about how to make sure that voodoo was depicted the way that voodoo was meant to be, not the way Hollywood did it. And so it was a whole lot of building that trust. And so Sandell, that was something, when you said that it took time for them to open up to you, to tell them the story, it's kind of the same way with the people who protect that kind of spiritual practice because they don't want someone they don't know to Hollywoodize it and to just kind of use it as sensationalism. And it meant a lot to them that I wanted to do it the right way, that I felt like portraying it in the way that it was meant to be was going to be a better story, first of all. And second of all, it was just respectful to the culture and the people who practiced it and the history. And so once they understood that, then I had a whole lot more success getting the help that I needed and the research that I needed. And I can pick up the phone and call Willow or text Willow at any point. I remember one day I was writing a scene from Crescent City Sin, the sequel, and I was just like, all right, I need something really gritty here. Would this make sense for her to do? She's like, oh, I like that. Yes. And then she can do this. Yes, thank you. It's like, I just needed to know what truly would happen there. And so it's not that sensationalism thing, but it's researching that spiritualism the way that it actually is. It's held with those people and it's so protected that they don't want outsiders coming in. And even though I'm not truly an outsider, I'm not part of that spiritual world. I'm not, part of that voodoo culture. I'm not, part of that. But both of these women have taught me so much. And everything that is in my books, in the Crescent City series, every bit of candle magic, every bit of, the seance, all of that I've done. because I felt like if I had not done those things and learned how to do those things, I couldn't properly write about them, because there's such a sensory experience, and you can't write about that. And if you have not felt it, if you have not done those things, and there's the earthiness, the smells of it all, the feels of it, just as you're doing those things. I've learned how to read tarot cards. I've learned how to do candle magic. I've learned so much that it really, I see now why they protect it so much, and why it does take that time to let somebody from the outside in to, tell their story to, and to tell their practice to, so that it actually gets the justice. So all of these stories and all of these primary sources that you guys have been able to get your hands on and to really see those stories, it's a very personal thing. To have that, and it's a privilege as a writer to be gifted with those types of resources and those people who are willing to share their stories with you, whether it's family members. And I mean, I too had grandfathers in World War II. I heard more of their stories, especially as they got older. At first they kind of protected those stories, like you said, put it in a box, and it kind of got put away. But then as they got a little bit older, they wanted to share their stories. They wanted those stories told while they still had time to tell them. And so we started to hear a whole lot of them. And I wish that I had sat down with my grandfather in the tape recorder when he was just almost reliving all of that, to kind of get that out, his story told. And I wish I had done the same thing with my dad. We lost my dad in May, and he was in Vietnam. And we never really heard his true stories. He told us what he wanted us to know. He had a Bronze Star that he said he got for teaching a Korean general to water ski. I'm fairly certain that's not what he did teach a Korean general how to water ski. There was a picture, like a newspaper article with him and the Korean general, and they talked about that. But there was more to that story, and I don't know what it is. He talked about a dog that he had and how they would barbecue and things like that. He was a door gunner. And so he was in a helicopter, and he told us all the time that, he was in charge of, shooting machine gun fire into the tops of the jungle. And he liked that it was into the tops of the jungle because he couldn't see if there was anybody down there. And he really hoped there wasn't. He said, I hope I missed every shot I took. And, that's all he would ever say. That's the most of his story that we ever got from him. And so having those stories told is very special, having someone who's willing to open up and tell those, because I do wish that I had had more of his. I wish he had been more willing to share, but I think most of his was because we were his kids. And I think he was protecting us from that. Even as adults, he was protecting us from something that, our dad had done that maybe we would have thought badly of him for, even though it was like Annette's story, not necessarily his choice. That's something he had to do.
Well, my father ended up serving in the U.S. Army and served in Vietnam when I was a baby, and also has a Bronze Star. And I found the slides that he took from his time in Vietnam, and have actually put them up on a website just to see if anyone might have known him from his time there, because that too is part of the mysteries. What was his service in Vietnam like? What was that Bronze Star for? I mean, all I know is that it was related to a night ambush, and I know nothing else about it. And he was known as the German sergeant. I met one person who had met him at a funeral in Vietnam for one of the servicemen who passed away. But other than that, it's just an enormous mystery. Yeah.
It is interesting how little we can know about someone so close, because those experiences are painful for them to share, but not necessarily everyone for the same reasons. Like I said, my dad didn't want to share it because I think he was afraid of what we would think of him. And, it was a time in his life that was past. And even though he was honored for that time, it wasn't necessarily something that, it wasn't anything that he was going to brag about, because whatever it was that got him that Bronze Star, while it was serving his country and he was grateful for that, I'm not sure that was something that he was necessarily, looking back at it, proud that he had to do, So it was an interesting phenomenon. We've got commentary under Gilded Moon is wonderful.
I agree.
Oh.
I can't wait to read it. I cannot wait to read it. Now that I've seen all the previews and the synopsis and everything, I'm like, ooh, I want to know what happens now. So we got more about a mountain sing. Yes. That's another good one too. Yes, she was. She absolutely was. I saw the interview with her, and she was a great interview as well. So Mountain Sing is a really interesting story too. Very, very nice. Okay, so now Jane, you mentioned that red wine turns you into a vampire, so I have the perfect story for you.
Okay.
Absolute perfect story for tonight, and Jane's vampire face. So here we go. This is our New Orleans history and mystery segment. And so we are going to learn tonight about the Cascade Girls of the old Ursuline Convent. And this, of course, is legend I could debunk, but I won't, because like so many people in New Orleans, I like this story and we're going to keep it. So I will tell you that this is a fantastic book. This is not the only place that I get my ghost stories from. I have several books where I find my information, but this is a great book. It's called Feared-At, and it is by the late Michael Murphy. This is a great book just for fun stuff about New Orleans, and it's got a lot of great stuff about New Orleans culture, including the Cascade Girls of the old Ursuline Convent. Now, the Ursuline Convent sits down in the French Quarter, and it's the old Ursuline Convent that's in the Quarter. The new Ursuline Convent is actually further away. We're in the 9th Ward. And so the old Ursuline Convent is, it was a school at one point. The Ursuline nuns were some of the first to educate girls and the first to educate people of color, including Native Americans, in the city of New Orleans. And so the Ursuline nuns were very well respected for what they did. However, they also have a bit of mystery that surrounds the 3rd floor of the Ursuline Convent, and it comes from the Cascade Girls. Now, when New Orleans was settled, it was settled largely by men. And the men, in order to find wives, would often go sneaking off out of the city, out into the wilds where the Native American tribes were. Not always a smart or safe thing to do. And so there was a shortage of eligible wives in New Orleans. And so the governor appealed to France to send some women. Well, they sent over a first batch of women, which were taken largely from, you guessed it, prisons. So what they sent over to be highly eligible wives for these Creoles were a bunch of prostitutes. That didn't go over well because they weren't the best quality of women, and of course just sort of added to the seediness of the city. And so they said, no, not those kind of women. Like, we need actual wife material women. And so a couple of more times, they actually tried to send the right kind of girls. And then finally, they got it right when they sent over the Cascade Girls. And the Cascade Girls came over on the ship. They were very pale because, as women would have been coming over 6 months from France to New Orleans at that time, they were kept below decks. And so being kind of subtropical in Louisiana, most of those people were a bit more tan. The Creoles had more tan. And so these girls coming off of the ship were very, very pale indeed. And they also carried all of their belongings in a trunk that was shaped like a casket. And so it was called a casquette, which at the time just simply meant basically a suitcase or, a case of some sort, a small case. But what it actually was, this rumored size, is that it was basically the size and the shape of a coffin. And so they carried all their belongings and it basically dragging this thing behind them to the Ursuline Convent as they got off the ship. And so they got the name the Cascade Girls. And I guess the casket kind of served a couple of purposes. One, it brought all their belongings over in one container. The other thing was if they died on the way over, they had somewhere to put them. And so, lots of people died on the passage over. So that was kind of like, well, we can just put them in that, dump their stuff in. And so the girls brought all of their stuff over to the Ursuline convents. The Ursulines were then in charge of helping them kind of make eligible matches. Now, some of these Cascade girls actually made some pretty fine marriages for themselves. But the rumor was that the girls had all of their things stored up in the 3rd floor of the Ursuline convent, kind of keep all of their things out of the way. Well, the story goes that people went up there and the boxes were empty. They had no belongings. Oh. And so these very pale girls had come over with caskets and nothing in them. And so it became rumored that, of course, that was their own casket that they were in. So then legend goes on to say that they decided that the casket girls needed to actually stay in their caskets. And so the legend has it that the caskets are now occupied by the casket girls, and that the third floor hurricane shutters are nailed shut, which they are, that they're nailed shut, and the nails were blessed by the Pope so that they could never be opened, and that the casket girls could never go wreak havoc on the city of New Orleans.
Wow.
And so the third floor of the Ursuline Convent is rumored to have the casket girls sealed up into the third floor, through the third floor nailed up windows. Now, in 1978, a couple of amateur reporters decided that they were going to go to the Ursuline Convent and they were going to find out about the casket girls. Well, the Ursuline nuns were not having any of that, and they certainly were not going to entertain any of their ludicrous interview questions. So they told them very flatly to go away. Well, the pair of amateur reporters decided that they were going to set up their equipment and they were going to have their own little stakeout on the Ursuline garden property overnight. Well, the next morning, their camera equipment was scattered all over the garden, and they were brutally murdered. And so, they died. So perhaps they got what they wanted. They just weren't allowed to keep it. So that is the legend of the casket girls. Maybe they got their answer after all. Now, again, I could debunk that, but where's the fun in that? We're not going to go anywhere near that. We're going to let the casket girls lie on the third floor of the Ursuline Convent in all their glory. And so that legend right there, of course, it's spurred on by Anne Rice and by the tour guides and all of that. But, the legend of vampirism in New Orleans is a culture that actually is very much thriving down there. There's that little underworld of the vampire culture down there. And of course, it all leads back to the casket girls of the Ursuline Convent. So there you go. There's our New Orleans legend for tonight. I know, right? I mean, it's like a crazy, creepy story. All right. So we've got a question for you, ladies. Since it's the holidays, and this is our last show before Christmas. And so happy Hanukkah. This is the 8th night of Hanukkah, is it not? Am I correct in that? I've lost track. But I believe it is. The 7th?
Mm-hmm.
7th night. All right. So for whether it is Christmas or Hanukkah, what is your holiday main course? We always tend to have turkey for Thanksgiving, but honestly, I'm not a huge fan of turkey. I prefer the ham we have for Christmas. So it could be anything. I know my mom also spent a Christmas in the Czech Republic, and they had fish. It was this big fish. They kept it in the bathtub until it was the time to cook it, and it swam around in the family tub, and they had fish on Christmas. So what is your holiday main course? Who wants to go first? Ham, turkey?
Shall I jump in first?
Yeah. Jump in first, Soraya.
So in New Zealand, it's summer here in New Zealand for Christmas. So often a lot of New Zealanders will actually just have a good old-fashioned barbecue on Christmas Day because the weather's often so hot. But it is also traditional here to have turkey and also a ham, which we normally have baked in the oven with a very nice glaze on top. But yeah, there's half the New Zealanders would have ham and turkey, and the other half are probably having, just an average barbecue.
Now, I got to ask you, Soraya, too, kind of on that same thing, since it is summer where you are. I mean,
yes,
you must decorate differently for Christmas than we do with the evergreen. And I mean, do you do that? How do you decorate?
No,
for
we
Christmas?
do that. Yeah, no, I think we still have the same traditions, really, and it is with an evergreen. It is very much the same as what we would see, in America or anywhere else. But we just have this lovely hot weather, so it's just a little bit different.
You don't sing "Let It Snow, Let It Snow, Let It Snow" down there, do you?
We do.
You're
actually.
not dreaming. Are you dreaming of the white Christmas? Soraya?
No, our children come home singing all those songs, and it's something that's so funny because the weather's always so hot here at Christmas, but we still sing all those sort of songs about white Christmas.
Nice.
Oh gosh, I guess that comes from a long history of European early settlers, and they brought all of their traditions down with them. Is that right? Okay? It's like, yeah, we're
Absolutely,
not going to let it snow down in New Zealand. But yeah, I'm going to share it on this one. I would totally dig a barbecue on Christmas. I think that's doable. I mean, growing up in South Louisiana, I remember more than one Christmas where I was running around trying out my new toys in shorts. So we've had our share of warm Christmases too, but always the big thing spread of hot food and everything as we, wanted to go play outside in our shorts. But then I also remember some extremely cold and wet Christmases in Louisiana. And when it's cold in Louisiana and wet, boy, it will chill you to the bone. I have been as cold in Louisiana as I have been anywhere else, just simply for that wet cold. Annette, what about you? What's on your holiday main course?
We still have a sort of German dish on Christmas Eve night, and it's one of those impossible German long words where they just keep putting words together. So in German, it's called übergebackene Käsebrötchen, all one word, mit Spargel, with asparagus. So the long word means overbaked cheese, little rolls with asparagus. And what that is you take half of a German roll and you put a lot of butter on it, and then you sort of toast that for a while, and then you melt Swiss cheese on it, ham, toast that some more, and then you put white asparagus on it. So it's a very light sort of Christmas Eve dinner. And my husband, who's the cook in the family, because I can't cook worth a darn, has taken this recipe and sort of made it his own. And so that's what we do on Christmas Eve. But he just likes saying it. It's the only German word he can say. I'm going to make you Käsebrötchen, he just thinks it's funny.
I love it. I love it. I took German in high school. Please don't ask me to say anything because I don't remember any of it. It's one of those things where who's gonna keep me talking in German? Nobody else knows this. The 4 years of German in high school, I don't remember much of it, but I do remember Pfeffernusse, the cookies. Pfeffernusse. And so I went to Aldi's the other day, the grocery store, and I was like, oh, "There's Pfeffernusse!" I come home with my Pfeffernusse, and my daughter looks at it and goes, "What is this?" That it's Pfeffernusse, and she's again. What is this?
It's amazing how much you can get now.
Yeah.
You can get the Lebkuchen, you can get the Pfeffernusse, you can get all that at the grocery store, which is sort of amazing to me.
Mm-hmm. It was so cool. I was like, yes. I love it. Spicy, gingery kind of cookie. They're so good. They're a little white. Oh, love them. So, Joy, ham, turkey, fish. A really long German word with asparagus.
Right. Don't I wish. Typically ham or turkey, but I will say my husband's Italian, and so he half Canadian, half Italian, but his father died when he was 5, so he was raised by the Italian side of the family, his mother's side. And so their traditional Christmas Eve was always to have this fabulous lasagna that was enough to feed the whole, several pans of it. And she, when I first
were having it too.
Oh, well, when I first married into the family, and I'm with Lynette, I'm a terrible cook. I mean, I literally set cookbooks on fire. I mean, literally. I've stored one time a whole rat on my nose right here. It's just story after story. But my mother-in-law gave me her super secret family recipe, but it was supposedly the easy version for like the non-Italian dumb blonde or something. I don't know. She made a big deal of saying, even you can do this, And I tried it, and I promise you, it probably took me 4 hours, and there was sauce all over the walls. It was awful. It was terrible, and I swore I'd never do it again. But here in this pandemic year, when we can't fly to LA and be with her, and she can't be here, and I sat there thinking, I'm so glad you brought this up. I'm thinking that would be a neat thing to honor her, to start a tradition where we have lasagna. I don't know who's going to make this lasagna, but
Stouffer's makes a reasonable one. And everything. You just throw it away. And you have to watch it.
Maybe I'll go to a nice Italian restaurant, buy the lasagna, bring it home, but somehow honor the Italian side of the family. So thanks for making me think of that. I think I'll have this year.
Well, just a glass of wine to me when you eat your lasagna this year, however it comes to be on your plate. Jane, what about you?
So I actually love to cook. I'm kind of obsessed with food. And so the past 6 years, I've done this New York strip roast with a garlic herb crust with like garlic, salt, rosemary crust. And so you marinate it for like at least a day and then roast it. And this year, I think I'm actually going to make 2 because we're social distancing.
Dinner is
Yeah,
why.
you can all come.
Now we all want to.
Yeah, and I'm going to make 2 because we're social distancing for my folks because of everything, and I'm going to drop one off to them, and make one for us, and this cheddar sage mashed potatoes I do every year is so good, and then like the green stuff and whatever. But yeah, I've been making that for a while now. Yeah.
That sounds amazing.
It's really good. Yeah, so yummy.
So good. Sandell, what do you guys have?
Well, so part of my memoir is about my patchy relationship to Judaism. And I spent many years just thinking, do I want to be Jewish? Do I not want to be Jewish? Who am I? And there were years that early in my marriage, I actually had a Christmas tree. Until my older son said to me one year, "Mom, it's too confusing." I said, "What's too confusing?" He said, "The Christmas tree and the menorah. Can't we just light the menorah?" So we did, but there were many years that I would bake a ham and put the cloves and the pineapple and all that stuff on it and the brown sugar, and it was wonderful. But now I'm a true Jew. We go out, but we won't this year, order in Chinese food.
Nice.
Yes.
On a non-COVID year, all of the Chinese restaurants are full of Jews. Christmas Day.
Well, the year that my mom went to Paris, my brother and sister-in-law decided they were going to go camping for Christmas. And so my kids and I are going, okay, what do we do? So we went and had Chinese food with all of the Jewish people. We're a largely non-religious family anyway, but it was just kind of funny. It was like, I'm so glad the Chinese places are open. I was like, thank you to all of our Jewish friends, because now we get Chinese food when no one else is here for the holiday. And Joy, the lighting the cookbooks on fire is a lovely story. I love that. My mother uses the fire alarm, the smoke alarm in her house as the kitchen timer. And she always said the only reason she has a kitchen is because it came with the house.
My kind of woman.
Yes. I mean, whenever I go over there, one of 2 things will happen. If we're going to have a family dinner, and it's usually me or my sister-in-law who's a phenomenal cook. My brother is also a great cook. But the whole deal is she'll pay for the groceries if someone else will cook them. So that's her get out of jail free card. She drinks wine and she talks to us while we cook. And she'll do like dishes and stuff so she doesn't have to cook. But I mean, it's kind of more of the store-bought life that this woman lives. She has introduced me. I mean, I'm a widow, and so my kids and I, it's 2 of my kids are grown and gone, and it's just me and my youngest and my mom most of the time. And she has introduced me to the joys of pre-chopped vegetables, pre-sliced cheese, like all of this. I'm going, this is great. I know. I've eaten like this for a long time. You need to make fun of me. Isn't it great? And I go, so, if I'm going to go cook something, we were making gumbo. My son came into town and he's like, Mom, I'm going to make a gumbo. And I was like, you do that. It's like, we'll go to the store. We'll get the stuff. I said, okay. And I need an onion. I said, how much onion you need? He said, I have about 1 onion. I'm just going to chop it up. And I said, here, picked up the little container. And I said, this is about 1 onion. And he's looking at me and he's going, I like it. And he starts we're making converts of them all now. I used to be that, make everything from scratch. And I'm going, mm-mm. But, I use my mom's kitchen because my kitchen is very, very tiny in my apartment. But I'm glad my mom's house came with a kitchen because I use it. I don't use the smoke alarm nearly as much as she does. I do use the kitchen. So that made me think, I was like, oh, Joy and my mom need to hang out and drink some wine while I cook. This is the way it needs to be. And she buys the wine most of the time. She has a bottle of her wine that she keeps over here and a bottle of my wine that she keeps over there. And this is our life now. Sit around drinking wine and letting other people cook. I love it. So we always have the ham, and we do the honey baked ham. Normally it's like easy, it's done. We just warm it up. But this year, my brother has decided to do a brisket in the smoker, and I'm like, yeah,
oh, nice.
This is gonna be good. So he's in charge this year, and so he loves to get out the smoker. So he has got a mission, and so that's what we're gonna have. We're gonna smoke brisket. So I'm looking forward to that. So it's kind of like Soraya's barbecue, sort of. In a way, we're gonna let my brother smoke some brisket. It's barbecue-ish. You slather it.
You guys are preparing for your move to New Zealand.
That's right.
right.
We are preparing for our move to New Zealand. We know how to do a good barbecue. We can do it for the holidays. We will fit right in with the rest of you. Not only that, but we like the warmer weather, so we'll fit in with that too. It's the last thing I ever want to see is a white Christmas. I know y'all up there love those things, but good Lord. It's so cold. I can't do it. We had a dusting of snow up here, and I'm just like, oh God, it's starting. Every winter, I start looking at teaching jobs in Grand Cayman because I just really, it's been the entire winter figuring out how to relocate somewhere even warmer than where I am that has no winter. That's sort of my goal in life. You ladies have been an absolute blast. And it has been such fun talking with you guys and getting to know you and hearing your wonderful stories, your wonderful research. I've got to do my little plug things here because, hey, we're doing the Girlfriend Weekend Slumber Party. Crescent City Sin, which is the sequel to Crescent City Moon, has been chosen as one of July picks for that. And Annie McDonald and a whole bunch of us that are good friends are going to be doing an author panel for the Girlfriend Weekend with the Pulpwood Queens. So check it out. We are going to be on the Saturday panel, and we are going to be doing something truly fun that I can't tell anybody about just yet, but oh my God, it's going to be fun. And it does involve Mike Everhart, who's one of my favorite audiobook narrators. Love him to death. And books make great gifts. Here's a couple. Feel free to check these out. I recommend them. Other people do too, apparently. So Crescent City Moon and Crescent City Sin are available on Amazon and will still ship to you in time. And if those aren't your jam, here's a few more that you can check out. These are the books that we've been talking about tonight, and they are fantastic. So please support our authors. Find your next great read and your next great for the holidays. So ladies, thank you once again for spending so much time. It has been a joy. If you get a chance, go over to Nola's Second Line or the Right Review and check out some of those comments that we haven't had a chance to get to. I know you guys could see them coming in. We've had a great conversation, and I know we'll continue to see some more comments as people catch up with us in the replays as well. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for bringing all of your perspectives, all of the facets to a beautiful and powerful time in history. And happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and Happy Hanukkah to all of those who celebrate. Happy holidays. I will see you guys after.
Bye, everybody.
You know.
See you.